And hello! In this video, we're going to create together a website that allows you to create and join polls. So basically a Kahoot. So I'm going to start by structuring my application with a front-end folder and a back-end folder. And we're going to start by creating a page that we'll call Create Poll, in which we'll be able to create a poll. As you might guess, I'm going to start by making a container that will take 100% of the height and width and will be blue. Inside this container, we're going to put our content, which will have text with a small blue block, in which we'll put a text input for the question, 4 text inputs for the answer choices, and finally a button to validate. Once my visual is ready, I can start tackling the backend. To be somewhat organized, we're going to create a folder for our tables and a folder for our services. We're going to start by creating our poll table, which will contain a question, answers, and a game ID. Why am I adding a game ID when I already have an ID? Because I want to do something like in Kahoot, where our game ID will only have 5 characters, so it's simple for the user to join a poll. Now, I'm going to create a poll folder in Services, in which I'm going to create a Create Poll route, which will have in the body the same thing as what we put in our table. From that, I can do a DB insert, select my table, and link my body to my data. Then, I'll be able to use my front end to communicate with my back end. Before that, I create 5 variables that correspond to my question and my 4 answers, and I link each text input to its corresponding variable. Now, I'm going to add an on-click event on my button to send this data, and I'll be able to call my Create Poll route. There, I'm going to build my body here to make a create object. I get my question, I get my 4 answers. I go to the library to check utilities. To be able to use UUD, which allows me to generate IDs, I'm going to slice it between 0 and 5 to get the first 5 characters. And if I go back to my preview, fill in my fields and validate, when I go back to my table, I'll be able to find it. Now, we also need to be able to join a poll. So I'm going to create a new one that will be called Home, in which I'm going to integrate a design similar to Create Poll with a place where I can enter my game ID, and of course the possibility to access my Create Poll page. So first of all, I'm just going to change the path of my Create Poll so it's no longer my home page, and I'm going to make it so that when you click on Create Your Own Poll, it directs us to Create Poll. So for that, I added an on-click event, do a get router followed by a get property. Select push. I add a lambda function and I choose the path I want to go to. I link all that, and now if I go back to preview and click on it, I'm properly redirected to Create Poll. Now, I'll be able to retrieve the data from a poll by entering its ID and clicking Validate. So to do that, I'm going to create a new route getBySlug, which will be a get with a game ID in the body and which will return the data from my poll. So I'm going to do a DB on poll, add a filter on game ID that I'll be able to retrieve from my body. If I execute that as output, I'm going to have an array with 1 element. So I'm just going to do a first to get the first element and retrieve it as an object rather than as an array of objects. I link all that, and now I can go back to play in my front end. So I'm going to add a game ID variable that I'll link to my text input and an on-click event on my validate. Now for the test, we're going to do a get poll by slug. Send it our game ID and log response. If I put anything here, I have nothing. If I put a good game ID, I retrieve its info. And so, in reality, what I want to do is redirect to our poll page if we have a response. So I'm going to cast that as Boolean. I'm going to redo a redirect with my get router. So I recreate an object, and the path this time will be a concatenation of /poll /plus my game ID. So if I go back to preview and write anything, nothing happens. And when I put the correct game ID, you can see here that the URL has changed. So now what are we going to do? Well, we're going to make a new page that will be called Poll with always a similar design, except here we'll have our question. There we'll have the result of our votes, and there we'll have buttons that we'll click on to vote. First of all, I'm going to want to retrieve the data from my poll to display it on my page. We're just going to add the path here and add /:ID. And with that, we have 2 options. Either I re-retrieve my data thanks to the ID I have in my URL, or rather than making another call to the backend, I can create a store that we can call current poll for. Example, a poll object with question, answers, and game ID. And therefore, I can go back to my home logic, do a get from my store, do a set property on poll, and fill it with the data from our response, which is a bit higher up. And now, if I put my game ID and validate, if I click on current poll, I can find my data. So I'm going to define my question by adding brackets and defining its properties by selecting the question in my store. So now, if I go to preview, I have that. By the way, it's not very pretty. We're going to increase the width. For the buttons, I'm going to create a very simple component. You'll understand why that we'll call button vote with two properties which will be its value and its index. And we'll say that its content equals its value. Now, if I go back to my poll page, I can create a template, choose a for logic, and iterate over my answers which are defined in my store. And now, I can select the component I just created. In this component, we'll say that the value equals template, and that the index equals template. We'll still style all that a bit. And there you go. Now, I need to be able to vote for my favorite tool. So, we're going to create a vote table which will contain a game ID and a vote index. From that, I'm going to create a new service for votes. A route to create a vote will contain, once again in its body, a vote index and a game ID. So I'll be able to do a DB insert on my vote table, send it my body here, and I can retrieve the current state of my poll by doing a DB find a vote with a game ID filter. And this game ID by retrieving my body here and doing a get property on game ID, and I just realized that I inverted the type of the two. Forgive me. So I link that there, I send that in my response, and now I can go back to the front end side. My logic, I'm going to do it on my button. So I'm going to add an on-click event here, and I'll be able to call my create vote route. Send it in the body, my index, and my current game ID. Now, I can do a little log of my response, and from now on, if I vote, we can see that each time I vote, a new element is added to my database. Now, I'd really like to display small bars here that have a height based on the number of votes for each answer. To do that, I'm going to create a new route that we'll call getVote by game ID, which will contain a game ID in the body. And we'd like that to return an array of 4 numbers corresponding to the number of votes for each answer, the total number of votes, and an array of percentages which corresponds to the percentage of each vote compared to the total number of votes. So I'm going to do a DB find first on the vote table, filter on my game ID, and so there to group all that in array form. Either I can do something complicated, or I can use a package that already exists that will simplify my life. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to click on Library, install the ES Toolkit package, and once that's done, I'll be able to use the count by from ES Toolkit, which will take as input my list of items, and which I'll be able to group using the vote index. Here, I'm going to execute that first so it recognizes the item. I'm going to cast it so it understands that I expect to have an object that contains a vote index. And now I can do a get property on it and send it here. So if I re-execute that, we can see that I have an object that contains the number of votes for each index. Me, I'd really like it to be an array form. So I'm going to do a new array, which will be an array of 4 numbers. Here, I want to say that my result, it will also contain 4 numbers that we'll call 0, 1, 2, 3. I'll now be able to spread it and link each value here. So now, if I re-execute that, I have exactly what I want. I'm just going to test and vote for bubble. And there you go. So that, I can already send in my response, so I'm going to do a create object, and that will correspond to my array. The total number of votes, that corresponds to the length of my response here, doing a get length. And now I'd really like to transform this array into an array of percentages. So I'm going to do a map on it, which will take as input this array, and I'm going to execute a function on each item which will be a division of 3, 5, 1, or 2 here, in this example divided by my total number of votes. That I multiply by 100, and I can send that back in my response here. And so, once again, if I re-execute that, we can see that I have percentages. Now that I've done that, I can go back to my store, create an array of vote objects. There will be 4 of them. So by default, I can click 4 times on the little plus and reset my store and add a total vote property. Now, each time we vote, we're going to have to update that. So to not duplicate logic, I want to create a function at the store level that we can call setVote, for example. And there, I'm going to call my backend route, getVote. Make a create object for the body. My game ID, what is it? It's simply the game ID that's in the store. If I execute that, well, I have nothing in my response because I forgot to link my map to my output. So now it should work. And now I'm going to redo a map on the votes of my store. And for each element of my store, I'm going to want to do a set property of percentage first. Percentage, we're going to retrieve it thanks to the response from here that we're going to spread. We're going to do a get at the index we're interested in. That's convenient because here I can check the index to see it appear here. That I'm going to cast as string. You'll understand why. And I'm going to concatenate it with a percentage. Now, I'm going to redo a set property this time on vote. I take the same logic I did here. So I'm going to redo a get using the index and we're all good. Last set property that I almost forgot, the one for total vote which corresponds to that. If we apply ourselves a bit more, we can do something more readable, for example, like that, or decompose all that into several functions. Now, I link my map to my output. I'll click on export here, And in my button vote, instead of my log, which serves no purpose here, I'm going to call my setVote function. So now, normally each time I vote in my store, I'm going to have a calculated percentage. All I have left to do is make pretty little bars here that we're going to iterate over my vote array. We're going to enlarge this container, otherwise we won't see them. Shift them slightly down, align them at the bottom, and space around. And here, instead of putting 100%, we're going to select the template.percentage. Here we're going to add centered text, of course, which will display the number of votes. A small transition for the animation, and if I go to preview, I can see my values change with a small bar animation in real time. And we're all good.